Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to talk about the climate change in Vietnam. Well, first and foremost, I'm going to introduce you guys to know more about our group. We have 9 members in our group. That are me, Lê Trọng Huy, tên Nguyễn Quốc Đại, Trịnh Hồng Đức, Bùi Thị Hoàng Giang, Lê Nguyễn Mai Đình, Nguyễn Ngọc Bích An, Hoàng Ngọc Nhất, Nguyễn Lê Huyền Trân, and Mã Thị Hồng Hiếu. Okay, during our presentation, we're going to talk about 4 main parts that are, first and foremost, we're going to talk about the causes of climate change. Then secondly, we're going to talk about how climate change affects the biodiversity. And thirdly, we're going to talk about how climate change happens in Vietnam. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how Vietnam deals with its effects. Okay, so let's begin with the first part, that is the causes of the climate change.
Okay, so to continue with talk, I'm gonna talk about the causes of climate change. So there are 5 main primary causes of the rise in greenhouse gas emission that cause climate change. First is the use of fossil fuels. Carbon dioxide and methane trap heat in the atmosphere that are produced by burning fossil fuels such as coal, oil, wood, and natural gases. Our suggestion is that alternative energy sources should be used. Secondly, forest deforestation. Woods have absorbed 96% of carbon dioxide in mankind had released. According to number published in June, deforestation had reached record level last year. The total of 8,712 square kilometers of forest covered almost the size of Puerto Rico. It destroyed it in 2021. Not enough carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the Earth's atmosphere. The third reason is increased livestock farming. Growing demand for meat led to intensive agriculture of animals. Cow and sheep produce methane gas when they digest. This adds to the greenhouse effect. Alternative source of food should be considered. Number 4, Mr. Dai.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Đức. Now I will continue with the number 4, fertilizer containing nitrogen. Intensive farming quickly exhausts the naturally occurring nutrients in the soil. Farmers therefore use fertilizer to boost their agriculture output. But fertilizer containing nitrogen produce nitrous oxide emission, which increases the warming effect on the Earth's atmosphere, such as green manure and compost. Blood meal, bone meal, and seaweed extracts are available. Crop rotation can increase the nutrient in the soil naturally. Now for the 5th one, fluorinated gases. These particularly damaging gases are emitted from equipment and products such as commercial and industrial refrigerator, air conditioning system, and heat pumps. They are also used as blowing agents for foams, fire extinguishers, solvents, and aerosol propellants. Such emissions have a very strong warming effect, up to 23,000 times greater than that of the carbon dioxide. There are options other than fluorinated gases. For instance, hydrocarbon or ammonia used in refrigeration are considered safe and energy efficient. Now my friend will continue with the next part.
So thank you, Dai. I'm going to talk about climate change and the effect it is harming on biodiversity by 2 specific sections, current effects and long-term effects. Firstly, we'll look at the current effects that humankind has witnessed during these recent decades. The first and easiest to see impact is the word overheating. According to NOAA climate, the Earth is now about 1.1 degree warmer than it was. We are not on track to meet the Paris Agreement target to keep global temperature from exceeding 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. That is considered the upper limit to avoid the worst fallout from climate change. Moreover, from 2015 to 2019 were the 5 warmest years on record, while 2010 to 2019 was the warmest decade on record. Global surface temperature has increased faster since 1970 than in any other 50-year period over at least the last 2,000 years. In addition, greenhouse gas concentrations reached new heights. Carbon dioxide levels were 148% of pre-industrial levels. Greenhouse gas concentrations already at their highest levels in 2 million years have continued to rise. Next, a furthermore effect of increasing temperature are enhancing evaporation and therefore drying out soils and vegetation. For example, last summer was one of the hottest. Okay. Next, furthermore, effects of increasing temperatures are enhancing evaporation and therefore drying out soils and vegetation. For example, last summer was one of the hottest and driest on record in the western US. This spring, soil moisture content in the west of America is at its lowest level in 220 years, and fuel moisture content in the Santa Cruz Mountains is at a record low. The second witnessed impact of climate change is increasingly extreme weather events, which have caused a surge in natural disasters over the past 50 years, disproportionately impacting poorer countries. From 1970 to 2019, these natural hazards accounted for 50% of all disasters, 45% of all reported deaths, and 74% of all reported economic losses. Next, according to the statistic of WMO, there were more than 11,000 reported disasters attributed to these hazards globally, with just over 2 million deaths and $3.64 trillion in losses. More than 91% of the deaths occurred in developing countries. Storm, the most prevalent cause of damage, resulted in the largest economic losses around the globe. Next, more water vapor in the atmosphere has exacerbated extreme rainfall and flooding, and the warming oceans have affected to the frequency and extent of the most intense tropical storms. Climate change has also increased extreme sea level events associated with some tropical cyclones, which have increased the intensity of other extreme events such as flooding and associated impacts. This has augmented the vulnerability of low-lying megacities, deltas, coasts, and islands in many parts of the world. Moreover, an increasing number of studies are also finding human influence exacerbating extreme rainfall events, sometimes in conjunction with other major climate influences. Examples include the extreme rainfall in eastern China in June and July 2016 and Hurricane Harvey, which hit Houston in 2017. Now we will turn to the longer-term impact, or we can say that is the forecasted effects of climate change. Firstly, there will be a tremendous impact on the agriculture and food security. As mentioned before, we are now witnessing an absolute increasing temperature. This may lead to the prolongation of the frost-free season and the growing season. Even worse, severe droughts, heat waves, and floods become more intense. Hence, food security is under threat. Secondly, the sea level will keep rising. Sea level has risen 8 to 5 inches since 1990, and it is projected to rise another 1 to 4 feet by 2100, with an uncertainty range of 0.66 to 6.6 feet. This is the result of added water from melting glaciers and ice and the expansion of seawater as it warms. Thirdly, it is not only humans that are affected. Animals will also suffer the consequences if climate change continues. The increase of the acidity of the oceans leads to the decline of availability of calcium carbonate, which makes marine organisms difficult to survive. If CO2 concentrations double, coral calcification rates are projected to decline by more than 30%. If CO2 concentrations continue to rise at their current rates, the combination of climate warming and ocean acidification could slow coral growth by nearly 50% by 2050. Algae is disappearing, leaving coral reefs to experience severe bleaching, which could result in their extinction by the end of this century. Another group of researchers found that the Miombo woodlands southwest Australia and the Amazon Guianas are projected to be the most affected areas. If there were to be a 4.5-degree temperatures rise, the climates in these areas would become unsuitable for most of the plants and animals to live there. This means up to 90% of amphibians, 86% of the birds, and 80% of the mammals could become extinct. The Amazon could lose 69% of its plant species. 89% of amphibians could become locally extinct. In Australia, 60% of all species could go extinct in Madagascar, and the gibbons in the Western Cape region of South Africa could lead to an extinction of a third of its species due to drought and water shortages. Finally, diseases such as malaria, dengue, cholera, respiratory illnesses, and malnutrition would be rampant. There is evidence that climate change has already begun to have an impact on human health. For example, the ticks that carry Lyme disease are now found in parts of Canada that were not long ago thought to be too far north for the ticks to survive. And in Bolivia, where the changing climate has caused more rainfall, the number of mosquitoes that carry dengue fever has soared. There have also been changes in plant distribution and types of pollen such as rockweed that cause seasonal allergies. That data also suggests that the number of heat waves related to deaths is on the rise. The air quality will likely continue to deteriorate in urban areas, assuming current emissions levels continue, causing more cardiorespiratory problems. Humans are going to suffer extreme hurricanes and tropical storms. Next, my friend will continue the presentation.
Thank you for introducing me. Now, I would like to talk about climate change in Vietnam as well as its effect and policy to address climate change here. As we know, climate change in Vietnam will lead to a situation in coming decades where Vietnam will be among the most affected countries by global climate change. And the negative effects of climate change are sea level rise, salinity, extraction, and other hydrological problems like flood, river mouth, erosion, sedimentation. It will all exert negative effect on countries' development and economy, including agriculture, aquaculture, road infrastructure. So, according to the IPCC, which means Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, report in 2014, believes that global climate change will have a major impact on a large number of countries, which is unfavorable for areas with poor adaptability and unusual fragile nature conditions. Unfortunately, Vietnam is identified by IPCC as one of the countries likely to be most affected by climate change due to its extensive coastline, mosquito and floodplain location on the path of typhoon, as well as its large population in poverty. I will describe the impact on the nature environment. The first is about temperature and weather change. According to daily data collected from 23 coastal meteorological stations in Vietnam for the periods from 1960 to 2011, during the 52 years, average annual temperatures in the coastal zone of Vietnam have increased significantly, and that reflects the trend of global warming. The second is about the abnormally fluctuating rainfall. Unlike temperature, change in precipitation trends vary considerably between regions. Statistics on rainfall over Vietnam in the period from 1961 to 2008 show a significant increase in the trend in the south central coast, while a decreasing trend in the north coast. Next, there are extreme weather phenomena. In the past 40 years, the number of typhoons in Vietnam has decreased, but the intensity has increased and the scope of damage has expanded. In 2007 to 2008, the flooding in the central province exceeded that of past 48 years. The northern part of Vietnam encountered an unprecedented cold wave lasting for 38 days, resulting in $30 million crop and livestock losses. And the ultimate impact on nature is sea level rise. One significant result is the sea level rise and seawater intrusion, with the coastline reduced coastal erosion, salinity intrusion related to them, and as predicted by experts, 37% of the total area of the Mekong Delta could be flooded more than 1 meter deep under the 0.5 meter sea level rise scenario. In addition to absurd effects on nature, climate change also affects people as well as the economy. With changing climate, extreme nature disaster has caused huge Vietnamese casualties and property damage. During the first half of 2016, water intrusion, heavy rainfall, and extremely cold weather caused 37 deaths and 108 injuries, and disaster damage were estimated at $757 million. In addition, agricultural and aquaculture activity are also affected, in which agriculture is one of the industries directly and absurdly affected by climate change. As for rice, the drought scenario is forecast to lead to a yield reduction from 12% in the Mekong Delta to 24% in the Red River Delta, and more arable lands will be flooded in rainy season, and saline extraction will increase in the dry season due to a combination of sea level rise and higher river flood. An estimated 590,000 hectares of rice area in the Mekong Delta could be lost to waterlogging and saline extraction, accounting for about 13% of region's current rice production. As for aquaculture, it will be at a disadvantage at higher temperatures, increased frequency of storms, sea level rise, and other impacts of climate change can affect the physiology and ecology of fish. Climate change in Vietnam also absurdly affects human health. Climate change with climate warming will directly or indirectly affect the spread of many infectious diseases. And now, my friend will continue with the next part.
Each of us have the responsibility for protecting the Vietnam environment from climate change by Number 1. Save electricity. Saving electricity is one of the solutions to climate change. Families should use energy-saving devices such as compact light bulbs, rechargeable batteries. Number 2. Stop deforestation. Currently, the forest area is increasingly shrinking due to deforestation and illegal logging. This is followed by a series of other climate and environmental problems such as dust, melting ice, etc. Therefore, an effective measure to overcome climate change is to prevent indiscriminate deforestation. Number 3. Reduce consumption. Reducing consumption not only saves spending, but also a measure to tackle climate change. Number 4. Update information on climate change. Each person needs to consult and learn about national and local climate change response policies and plans, etc. on the mass media. Thanks to that, there is more basis and motivation to convince others to do well in mitigating climate change. Number 5. Limit synthetic chemicals. Instead of using synthetic chemicals that are difficult to destroy, use substances of plant origin or replace with biological solutions. And number 6. Using alternative energy. Using fossil energy sources creates a large amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, to overcome climate change, it is necessary to find new alternative energy sources. This is the great human challenge. Next, let's see how the government deal with climate change. About the Vietnamese government. Vietnam, as well as other developing countries participating in the UNFCCC, have to perform a number of common obligations such as: Number 1. Developing a national climate change communication. Number 2. A national inventory of greenhouse gases from anthropogenic sources and the amount of greenhouse gases absorbed by sinks. Number 3. Assess the impacts of climate change on socio-economic fields and identifying areas and fields vulnerable to climate change and sea level rise. Number 4. Development and implementation of climate change adaptation measures. Number 5. Develop and implement programs and plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions when fully supported in terms of capital and technologies transferred from developed countries and international organizations. And number 6, conduct research and monitoring activities on issues or factors related to climate and climate change. Moving to the next slide, as you can see, in particular, climate change has been mentioned in the current constitution of Vietnam. This shows that the state has paid great attention to responding to climate change. In fact, since 2005, the National Assembly has paid more attention to the formulation and promulgation of policies and laws on natural disaster prevention and mitigation and response to climate change. This is reflected in the introduction of climate change-related laws such as the 2004 Law on Forest Protection and Development, Law on Dice 2006, Law on Biodiversity 2008, Law on Economical and Efficient Use of Energy 2010, Law on Water Resources 2012, Law on Prevention and Avoidance of Natural Disaster 2013, Law on Environmental Protection 1994, amended and supplemented in 2005-2014, Law on Hydrometeorology 2015. Finally, at the meeting on October 8, 2021, Prime Minister Phạm Minh Chính had a phone conversation with U.S. President's Special Envoy on Climate Change, John Kerry. Mr. John Kerry highly appreciated Vietnam's efforts in responding to climate change and affirmed his desire for Vietnam to further promote its role in responding to the global climate crisis. Given that Vietnam has great advantages and potential in developing clean and renewable energy, hydroelectricity, gas power, wind and solar power, Mr. Kerry affirmed that the United States supports and stands ready to support Vietnam. Vietnam has become a leading country in region in clean and renewable energy technology with specific cooperation projects.
I would like to say thanks to my teammates for having a really great presentation. Before coming to the the conclusion, I would like to give you guys a summary about our presentation. Well, we have presented about 5 causes of climate changes, how climate changes affects the biodiversity, and climate change in Vietnam, and how Vietnamese people deals with this issue. Well, in terms of the causes of climate changes, there are 5 causes that are the uses of fossil fuels, deforestation, increasing livestock farming, fertilizers containing nitrogen, and last is the fluorinated gases. Then the second part that we have presented is about how climate changes affect our biodiversity. Well, there are 2 kind of effects that are the short-term effects as well as the current effects. We have mentioned about the effects, the current effects, that is the world is getting hotter and that causes droughts and more severe storm. And in terms of the future effects as well as long-term effects, global climate change has caused the agriculture declines, animals die, human health become worsen, and the sea levels rises. And the third part that we have presented is climate change occurs in Vietnam. And last but not least is how Vietnam deals with these issues. We have mentioned about how the government takes actions into this issue. Okay, now I will jump to the last part, which is the conclusion. So in conclusion, we have all known that the climate change has been happening since many years ago, and it has many negative impacts on people, animals, and the whole ecosystem of the earth. Facing difficulties and concerns about the climate change, the Vietnamese government and the Vietnamese citizens need to take more efforts to protect the surrounding living environment and make a small contribution to saving the earth. Okay, that's all about our presentation. Thanks for listening. And do you have any questions? Please feel free to ask us.